One that's particularly close to my own work at the IMF is that we're often asked by countries to advise them on tax and spending reforms they have in mind. Clearly, there are a number of things that we then look at, which could be the effect on incentives to work and invest, but also the impact on inequality, fairness more generally, is a major concern for them. And so for us, it's something that we try to advise them on, not in terms of prescribing what we think their policy should be on the extent of redistribution or the extent of inequality reduction, but in terms of making sure that the policies are effective in terms of the ends that they themselves have. So we try to make sure that, for example, that they're not foregoing some efficiency gains that would be consistent with the amount of redistribution that they try and achieve. So we're trying to make sure that they get on that difficult frontier in terms of achieving the best possible trade-off between equity and efficiency concerns. Well, of course, they're, I think, very tempting policies to pursue because we might say, for example, well, the poor consume a large amount of food. They spend a lot of their proportion of their income on food. So let's subsidize food or petroleum or whatever it is. But the trouble is, of course, that while the poor may spend a larger proportion of their income on food, fuel, whatever, than the rich, typically the rich will spend a larger absolute amount. And what that means is that when you think about who gets the actual benefit from the subsidy or the reduced rate of tax, actually most of that goes to the rich, not to the poor. So some of the examples we come across that I mentioned today in the talk were instances where, for example, of $100 that the government forgoes through a subsidy or a reduced rate of VAT on food, perhaps the poorest 10% might only get about $4. So you're looking at a policy that costs $100 to get only $4 to the very poorest. But in a way, that's only the first step of the argument. The second step of the argument is to say, well, are there actually better ways of achieving it? Because if that's the only way you can help the poorest, maybe that's a price worth paying. So a large part of what I was talking about was really talking about how we can identify better targeted ways of reaching the poor, which is relatively straightforward to do in the more advanced economies where we have more sophisticated income support and other sort of social support systems. Easier to do there than in developing and emerging economies. But really, when you look at the numbers, even the very blunt tools that may be available in these lower income economies are typically going to be better, more effective